As with every Get the Scoop with Smirks episode, we'll do a product feature where we deep dive into a specific product or product category. In today's episode, we thought it fitting to talk about sunflower, the business that Smirk started with. Even today, our sunflower business continues to be very strong. Sunflower is a product that's widely available, both as an organic and conventional ingredient. And there are a lot of different ways to use sunflower, and there's a lot of different kinds of sunflowers too. So let's start talking about where they're growing, where they come from, when they plant them, everything like that. So, when you look at the Northern Hemisphere, whether it be Bulgaria, Ukraine, Russia, the United States, Canada, China, they're all primarily planted in the spring and harvested in the fall. The further south or closer to the equator you are in the Northern Hemisphere, the sooner the harvest will happen. So one of the things that Nick and his family did really well was partner with different factories in the United States and in Canada so that they'd have harvest times that started as early as late July and went all the way through November when they got up into Canada, which gave them some competitive advantages when marketing product, especially if there was a short crop and everybody was waiting for the stuff to get harvested. Then they had some of the first stuff they could ship to market. In the United States, sunflowers got really popular when they were roasted and salted inside the shell. I think everybody's familiar with David's or Biggs or Spitz, different kinds like that. The sunflowers are grown inside of a shell. It's called a confection sunflower or a striped sunflower. So it's a gray sunflower with a white stripe down the middle of the shell. And inside of those are the kernels. And so the shell itself works really well to carry flavorings on it, whether it be salt or dill pickle or jalapeno or all the crazy flavors you've seen out there. And even today, still, I see brands popping up with new flavors of sunflowers. One of the big trends that's really happened since I've come on in 2010 is how big of a sunflower seed you can get inside of the shell. So people, when you look at a company like Biggs, it's because they use the biggest size of sunflower that there is. When you look at some of the other companies, they use a smaller size of sunflower, but maybe the kernel's bigger inside of it or there's more meat inside of it. So there's so many variations for how you can do it with the what we refer to as an in-shell sunflower seed. Smirk's focus is mostly on sunflower kernels, though. The way sunflower kernels work is they take the shell off of the sunflower. So, Nick, you can kind of jump in and explain that process a little bit because you've lived it before about how they get the kernel outside of the sunflower.
Yeah, so as Donnie was mentioning on striped sunflowers, they come in all different sizes. So when you harvest a sunflower and picture the flower, the seeds that are around the outside of the flower are the bigger seeds. And the closer you get to the middle, the seeds get smaller. So striped sunflowers do get hulled. They call it hulled when you remove the shell for sunflower kernels. But the majority of sunflower kernels come from oil sunflower seeds, or what is called bakery. And those are just small black seeds. So when you're hulling a sunflower, you bring the sunflower in, you're going to clean it, get the sticks and other things out of the products, and you want to get a uniform size. So run it through a sizer or a cleaner that has a screen in there where the big seeds will stay on top of the screen, the smaller seeds will fall through the screen. So once you have them cleaned and sized, then you take them to what's called a huller, and it's basically a big fan blade. And the sunflower seeds in their shell fall into this fan blade, and the fan blade hits them, throws them against the outside of the machine, and there's a cone below the huller that's called a cyclone. And with air and gravity, the kernels fall to the bottom through the cone, and the shells get sucked out by air at the top. So it's really interesting how you actually get to the sunflower kernel, and you can make them from striped or oils. And the majority of them, of sunflower kernels, do come from oil sunflower seeds.
I think, too, you bring up a good point. Sunflower oil. That is really the driving force for sunflowers. The majority of the sunflowers produced in the world are what we call oil sunflowers or black oil sunflowers. And they're little, tiny, black sunflowers. The shells are black, but the shell's not as thick, right, Nick? The kernels are a little bit bigger inside of there. It's not as thick as a confection sunflower with the shells.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and with those small black oils, as you were talking about the oil market, the crude oil actually dictates a lot of the sunflower kernel prices, because if you're going to take that material instead of crushing it for oil and you're going to remove the shell and use it for a kernel, you have to pay a competitive price to get that. So the oil price will actually dictate sunflower kernel prices. But in regards to the processing, yeah, the shell on the black oils is thinner than the shell on the striped sunflowers.
Yeah, and interesting thing about the oil and how it follows the crude oil market. I mean, one thing we should definitely touch base on is what happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year. Ukraine being the biggest grower of sunflowers in the world, and Russia being the second biggest grower of sunflowers in the world. Is that correct, Nick?
Of oils, yeah,
Oil
of oil
sunflowers, yeah.
sunflowers. Yeah.
So when that invasion happened last year, the markets they doubled overnight for everything from sunflower oil to the sunflower kernels as well, because there was so much uncertainty in what was going to happen with everything. In the end, what happened was Ukraine actually had one of their biggest crops in history last year, so they still had the material to get rid of, but it was just a matter of getting it out of the country and into the processing facilities. So we saw the market double, and then we saw it fall to levels below where it was before the invasion, because there was so much sunflower, and at that time they were going into another harvest. So it's very interesting last
Well, and
year.
at the beginning of the Ukraine invasion, it was really interesting too, because we don't buy a lot of sunflower kernels from Ukraine. Actually, I don't think we buy any sunflower kernels from Ukraine, but Bulgaria is a big supplier to us, and our Bulgarian manufacturers stopped shipping because they were worried about the supply during that time. That was a very interesting time for us.
Yeah, and another thing is that sunflower oil is a widely consumed oil everywhere in the world. Um, Primarily in that region because it's so accessible to everything, where they don't grow as much soybeans or corn to make vegetable oil as they do with sunflower. So sunflower oil is the main thing that they use to cook with over there. So it was an interesting thing we saw. I think another important thing when you think about why people maybe in Europe and the United States use sunflower oil so much is sunflowers are non-GMO. There is not a GMO variant of sunflowers. There is hybrid sunflowers, and that's where they will plant a sunflower next to another sunflower so they can cross pollinate and create a new variety, but they're not genetically modified at all. One of the innovations we've seen, in the last decade, or maybe a little bit more than a decade, is where they took the black oil sunflower, which has a lot of kernels and gets a good kernel yield. They took the confection sunflowers, which has a big shell, so you get a bigger kernel inside of it, and they made a hybrid out of those that's referred to as a con oil. And the benefit of the con oil is the yields are much like a black oil sunflower, so you get more product off of an acre when you process it, but the kernels are bigger, like it would be on a confection sunflower. So that's some of the innovation we've seen with sunflowers over the years. I know Nick's been a member of the National Sunflower Association for a long time in the United States here, and they're one of the driving forces behind that, aren't they, Nick?
Yeah, and not only that, a lot of the research is done by the third party seed companies, but a lot of it comes out of the meetings that the National Sunflower Association has, and is driven by our customer demands. And one of the other things besides the con oil that I think was a big development that I saw towards the beginning of my career in sunflowers was the high oleic sunflower kernel. So in the oils, you have different versions of oil, different makeups of the oil, and you have low oleic, middle oleic, and high oleic oils, and that has to do with the shelf stability of the products. And we've seen the high oleic sunflower kernel has a great application when you're roasting it, because the stability of the oil, it has a better shelf life and will stay fresh for a longer period of time than if you were using a low oleic or just a standard oil sunflower.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have customers that prefer the high oleic kernels if they're doing a baking application, like you're mentioning, to keep the product a little bit more stable. Also, I know the high oleic kernels work really well inside sunflower butters as well, too, to keep them from going rancid. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm perfect. I got it right in my mind, man. So, yeah. Well, let's just do a quick recap what we've talked about with the sunflowers so far, Nick. So we've talked about the in-shell sunflowers with the confection sunflowers that are used for the snacking purposes, where you can roast them and salt them, put them in a bag, and enjoy them at a baseball game. We talked about the black oil sunflowers that are used to make sunflower oil. We've talked about the con oils, which are used to make kernels. We've talked about the high oleic sunflowers. Now let's really talk about what Smirks focuses on, and that's sunflower kernels. That's kind of the main thing that we work with is sunflower kernels when it comes to the sunflower sector. And when we get into the sunflower kernels, there's different kinds. The two main varieties you're going to hear though are bakery kernels and confectionery grade. With bakery kernels being a smaller kernel, they're measured by how many kernels are in an ounce. And generally, we find with the bakery kernels, the size or the kernel count per ounce is right around 650 kernels, plus or minus 50 kernels. Then we get into kernels that are more in the 550 count range, and that's what we refer to more as a confectionery kernel. And the smaller the number, that means there's bigger kernels. So if you get into a 350 count, that's going to be a really, really big sunflower kernel. And there are certain people who use that. When I first started out in the industry, everybody wanted a really big kernel. But as prices got more expensive and as the innovation happened, most people have settled around calling that 550 count kernel their confection kernel. And the applications that we see with that are primarily going into roasting for whether it's getting roasted and put into a package or getting roasted and put into a trail mix, getting roasted and put into a cereal, whatever the application is with that. And that's what we see mostly happening with those 550 count kernels or those confectionery grade kernels that we see. Certainly there still are customers, especially some of the retailers, that like a bigger kernel. When you're looking at the bag, they want the sunflower to be really big inside of there. So that's what you might see some of the bigger kernels going into. With the bakery grade kernels, the main applications go into bakery. I think the name says it all. So when you start looking at breads that have sunflower kernels inside of them, or granolas or bars, things like that, that is the primary application that you see with the bakery grade sunflower kernels. And the other application that the bakery grade sunflower kernels go into, or sometimes what happens, a kernel breaks in half and you have broken pieces, is bird food. One of the biggest markets for sunflower kernels in the United States is the bird food market. Birds love sunflower seeds. And bird food processors really like sunflower seeds too, because they're pretty inexpensive compared to other ingredients. So I think that using the sunflower kernels inside your bird food mix really helps a lot. It's a nice filler. It looks nice. The birds like it, and it's not quite as expensive if you were to use something else as well on it. Innovation wise, though, we're seeing a lot with sunflowers right now. So sunflower butter has been around for a little while, and it's starting to get a pretty good name for itself. And there's some good innovation happening with it too. But sunflower butter is an allergen-free butter. So we're seeing a lot more in the schools for people who want something that's not peanut butter, that they can take and use sunflower butter with jelly on a sandwich for the same application. We're seeing sunflower butter be packaged in straight retail packs as well. And I'm seeing fun things happening with some of my customers. If you can imagine that tahini is made out of sesame, they can make a tahini and sunflower mix where maybe sunflower is a little bit less expensive than sesame, and you put the two together and it makes really nice flavor. And you can use sunflower butter that's mixed with tahini together for any of these Persian recipes that you would normally use tahini for inside of. So that's some of the fun applications that we're seeing going on with sunflower butter right now. Some of the other things that are happening is taking the kernels and grinding them into a flour to use in a baking application. So we're starting to see a lot of crackers being made with sunflower mill or sunflower flour, where they've ground the sunflower kernels into a flour, and they're using that to make grain-free crackers. Again, it's an inexpensive ingredient to use when you compare it to something like a nut or an almond. In fact, if you were to look at the price of sunflower flour compared to almond flour, it's probably half the cost when you look at it. And it's new and it's innovative and it's something different that's not on the shelf. So I think that's some of the really cool things that are happening with it. Another thing that's happening is people are starting to make a protein out of sunflower kernels, where they will take the sunflower kernel, they'll expel the oil out of it, and you're left with protein. You've removed the fat and you have all the protein that's left inside of the kernel now. And then they use that inside of applications that people want more protein inside of. So again, it can be just for a regular food that somebody's trying to get a little bit more protein out of, or it can actually be from the nutraceutical world where they want more protein for a shake or something like that as well. So that's some of the innovations we're seeing happening with sunflowers. One of the other ones that's really caught on in the last few years is grain-free granolas. And that's where you make granola out of something that doesn't contain grains, grains generally being oats. So they're trying to find something they can put into the recipe that's somewhat similar to the price point of an oat, maybe just a little bit more, but not a whole lot more. Sunflowers really fit perfect in that. They are one of the least expensive ingredients when you look at something to use for that. So if you can imagine taking a sunflower seed and adding it with some pumpkin and cashews and then seasoning it like a granola and baking it off, you end up with a grain-free granola. It's very crunchy. It's got a lot of texture, and it just tastes great. It's just something a little bit different. So we're seeing that happen too, where people are making grain-free granolas with sunflowers being one of the main ingredients inside of it because of the price point of it. So